Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's program hosted by the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, The Unlocked Path, Imagining Women in Medicine. My name is Selena BMAC, and I am the Programs and Communications Coordinator at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, also known as HSP. HSP was founded in 1824 and proudly serves as Philadelphia's Library of American History with over 21 million manuscripts. So a few housekeeping notes before we begin with tonight's program. I have enabled closed captioning, so there's a CC button on your Zoom bar if you need live transcript for tonight. You should also, you might already see it on screen. We will be recording tonight's program and it will be sent to all registrants in a follow-up email. So if you would like to view the recording, be looking out for that in their inbox in the next few days. We will be taking time for some questions at the end of tonight's program, but go ahead and use the Q&A box or the Zoom chat throughout the program as you think of questions. We are in webinar mode, which means we cannot see you and you cannot see each other. So again, if you would like to ask a question, you can use the Q&A feature, you can use the chat, or you can use the raise hand function on Zoom as well. And one last housekeeping note, which is a bit more exciting than the others. We are raffling off a copy of The Unlocked Path tonight to one of our lucky registrants. So if you would like to be entered into our raffle for your own copy of The Unlocked Path, please use the chat to tell us where you are zooming in from. And then at the end of the program, we will randomly select a winner who is entered into our raffle. So we are now delighted to host author Janis Robinson Daly tonight. Janis, please feel free to come on camera. Janis Robinson Daly is the author of The Unlocked Path. She is a graduate of Wheaton College, and her writing explores female-centric issues and the power of supportive relationships developed among women. Janis is also a member of the Women's Fiction Writers Association, the Historical Novel Society, and the Cape Cod Writers Center. Tonight, she will be presenting on the inspiration for her debut novel, The Unlocked Path. Janis approached HSP several months ago with an idea to discuss family history, and she's going to share her own genealogical story and also tell us how to learn more about our own families. So also, if you've ever conducted genealogical research, please let us know in the chat. But without further ado, Janis, I will turn things over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Selena. And I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully have my PowerPoint set up as well. Everybody seeing that? Selena, Justina, okay.
Yes, I can see your screen.
Wonderful. Well, I'm so thrilled to be with you all this evening, zooming in from Massachusetts. And who would think that a woman from Boston her whole life would be speaking to folks about Philadelphia's history. And it really was some genealogy research that I had done to discover my Philadelphia family roots. And that inspired writing my debut novel, as Selena mentioned, The Unlocked Path. The book released in August of this year. And I am really thrilled with the reviews that are coming in and the connections it's making and the discoveries and questions that it's raising among readers of them stopping to pause and think about their own family histories. And what questions can you ask? You know, as we get ready for the holidays starting next week and families coming together, it really is an opportune time to think about talking about family histories. What secrets might be hidden down there of folks that you had never thought to ask before. So take the time, maybe clean out an attic and see what you might find, or a basement while you're gathered at the Thanksgiving table. So I am thrilled to share my story, and starting at the beginning of how I got started. And I really got started, as many of us do, as we're entering that empty nest part of our life. My youngest son was getting ready to graduate college, and both my boys were very active in sports and played right through the college level. They actually both attended school in Pennsylvania, Lafayette College and Franklin and Marshall. But I was suddenly saying, now what am I going to do with this extra time I have on my hands when I'm not traveling from Massachusetts to Pennsylvania to watch sporting events? And I've always been interested in family history, and decided that I would instead of picking up a very active retirement, a hobby of Pilates or pickleball or golf, I decided to keep my rear in the chair and do some research. So, I started going backwards, and I knew a lot about my own parents. They were both from the Boston area, wartime couple. My mom took the train from Boston out to San Francisco to meet my dad, getting off his naval ship after being in the South Pacific for nearly 22 months. And so they were married right in October of 1945. I knew a lot about my mom's family history. I knew my maternal grandmother, and was fortunate to have her until I was almost 30 years old. And I knew all about our family on that side that had come from Scotland. I also knew a good amount about my grandfather Robinson, because he was a pretty illustrious man. He was a lawyer. He was a watercolor and oil painter. He was a secretary to a Massachusetts congressman in Washington, D.C., and he was a novelist. He actually wrote several more romance novels back in the 1910s and 1920s. But it was his wife, my grandmother Robinson, who was a mystery to me. Both of my paternal grandparents passed before I was born, and I never really took the time to ask my dad about his mother. All I knew about Elizabeth Pierce Elliott was that she did come from Philadelphia, but how she got from Philadelphia to Boston was the first mystery. Why she waited until she was almost 32 years old to get married, which was quite an old maid time period to not be married at the age of 32. And then she actually separated from my grandfather for almost 20 years before they divorced. So lots of mysteries going on about her. From a second cousin, I actually obtained some photos that he had found somewhere along the way of her parents, so my great-grandparents, and this was the Philadelphia connection. Her mother, Laura Pierce, from a very prominent Philadelphian family, and her father, Adolphus Elliott. He was actually an English banker, but living in Philadelphia. So I have now my first step into my Philadelphia roots by meeting Laura Pierce. And it was from there that I went one step back further and learned about William Shannon Pierce. So my grandmother's grandfather and my great-great-grandfather. I had known that he was a judge, and always thought that that was a pretty cool thing to have in a family history, a judge way back in the 1800s, of course. And I started doing some more research on him. And that's really where my genealogy research went into a deep dive. Because once I started looking into William Pierce, there was quite a lot to discover. So I took myself from Boston down to Philadelphia and spent some time right in the library of the Historical Society of Pennsylvania. Had put in a request that they pull some information for me. And so they produced a rather large file folder of some of the documents related to his work as a judge and as a lawyer, an address he had given before the Law Academy, and some other pertinent pieces of information that I was learning about him. So that was pretty cool. The next piece of information I learned was before he was a judge for 20 years in the Court of Common Pleas, he was actually an abolitionist lawyer. And of course, Philadelphia's history is well known for the abolitionist movement. And I have always loved history, always loved historical fiction as a reader. And when I learned that, I immediately recalled one of my favorite books, which is The Invention of Wings by Sue Monk Kidd, which talks about the Grimke sisters who had come from Charleston to Philadelphia, very involved in the abolitionist movement. So now I'm even wondering if they crossed paths with Judge Pierce. But he defended the runaway slaves that were coming north in the 1850s. Of course, however, under the Fugitive Slave Act, if they were captured, they were tried, and main intent was to send them back to the South. So he defended those slaves. and won almost every case that he pled before the courts. So that was an incredible piece of history, and really quite an honor to know that this gentleman was in my family. I was descended from this man that believed in the rights of others, including the runaway slaves from the South. So now I'm really getting very enamored with the idea of who is William Shannon Pierce. Another notation I discovered through some of my research on him was the idea that he liked to discuss various phrases, and he knew them quite well, passages from the Old Testament. So while I was in Philadelphia, I also visited Laurel Hill Cemetery on the northeast corner of the city. And that's where the Pierce family plot is. And of course, cemeteries are another wonderful place for genealogy research. Being able to look at those monuments and seeing, the birth dates, the death dates. Of course, in the 1800s or 1700s, there were many children that, only had 1 year listed because they died in infancy. And there were 3 Pierce children listed on that monument that died in infancy. But there was another phrase that spoke to William Pierce's love of the Old Testament. And it's an excerpt from Song of Solomon 2:17, which is, "Until the day dawns and the shadows flee away." I am not a student of the Bible myself, but that phrase resonated with me as well. As somebody that was digging into history and trying to explore the shadows that lurked in history, and how do we bring them forward with a light, and have new understandings dawn about some of that history. I loved that phrase, and I tried to bring that forward as a theme in the book, The Unlocked Path. Of course, another great place for genealogy research is census data. And very fortunate that a lot of the Philadelphia city census records are now available online, where I discovered that there were 7 daughters in the Pierce family and 1 son, poor George, that all resided at 1710 Race Street. So I walked, of course, Philadelphia and tried to find out where the family home would have existed in the 1800s. It is now been replaced by the large United Way building, anyone that is familiar with Philadelphia. So it's at the very end of Race Street, across from the St. Peter's and Paul Basilica at Logan Circle, and looks out, the Benjamin Franklin Parkway right down to the beautiful art museum. So it was a full household with those 7 daughters and 1 son, and chopped off on the visual here. However, there were also live-in household help. So there were a couple of Irish maids listed as well. So obviously a prominent family in Philadelphia in the 1850s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Another phrase that really caught my eye was not only that he had 7 daughters, but his daughters were women of character and intellectual training. Now that was quite a statement to make about women in the 1870s. Women barely got through high school. Very few of them went to college. There weren't many colleges available to them. Of course, there would be Bryn Mawr in Philadelphia, Radcliffe and Smith and Holyoke and Wheaton College in Massachusetts, some of the 7 sister schools. But for the most part, very few women went on to advanced education. And they were women of character. So I'm instantly feeling a sisterhood with those 6 sisters of my great-grandmother, Josephine, Adeline, Maria, Estelle, Linda, and Florence, a 14-year span between the oldest Josephine and the youngest Florence. So I'm really getting excited now, learning about all of these different family members for sure. I had also realized from the research about Judge Pierce that he had a woman working in his law office. Again, very progressive man back in that time. And he even himself attended one of the New York State conventions for the suffrage movement, which was very active then. I had read also about one of his fugitive slave cases that Lucretia Mott, with the suffrage movement, also sat in that courtroom to make sure that justice was being served for those runaway slaves. So I'm very, very honored to know that this man is in my family history. And now I'm thinking, wow, I'm finished with my genealogy research, and I'm quite satisfied with it all. Until I went back to one other item that I had found in that folder at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania's library, and that was the Pierce coat of arms. Now, I had to call upon my sons who studied Latin in high school for the translation, and hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly as well, Dixet et fecit. He said and he did. And I'm not sure if William Pierce created this coat of arms or if it had been around for a long time and the phrase, the Latin phrase associated with it. But I certainly realized that William Shannon Pierce was a man that didn't just say his amazing words, defending cases in court and speaking his Bible phrases, but he was a man of action as well. And that certainly came true when I read one of the final lines in an entry about him in famousamericans.net, that he took an active part in founding the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. So what I'd like to do now is just pause for a moment, let you listen to Selena's voice for a couple of minutes. And what I've done is I've asked her to read a passage from chapter 6, which shows how I've taken all of this research that I've learned about William Pierce and fictionalized it and put it into one of the opening chapters for the Unlocked Path.
Chapter 6. A week later, Eliza again scanned the crowded library shelves. Shoulder to shoulder, the books on each shelf resembled a grade 1 class, the tops of heads forming a ragged line, the insides as unique as each student. There you are, you cursed toe crusher. She pulled the bulging Gray's Anatomy off the shelf and opened it to the frontispiece. Inked on the vellum, Eliza read the dedication. Until the days dawn and the shadows flee away. Song of Solomon 2:17. For the Honorable William S. Pearson on your retirement from the Board of Trustees. We are forever indebted to you for your commitment to the founding of the Female Medical College. Your vision and support allow us to banish the shadows in the study of medicine and bring forth the light of a woman's intellect, ability, and empathy. Our world will benefit from their bold strides forward. A new day has dawned. God bless you. Dean Ed, May 20th, 1860. Eliza hadn't considered her grandfather's involvement with the Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. None of his 5 daughters had felt the call to medicine. If not Pearson women, who were the bold ones who strode forward, endowed with intellect, ability, and empathy?
Great, thank you, Selena. So anyone on the webinar this evening, if you're from Philadelphia, I'm wondering if you've ever stopped and noticed the marker, the National Historic Marker at 3300 Henry Avenue, which notes the Female Medical College, as it was first called in 1850, was founded in Philadelphia. And the distinction being that it was the first degree granting women's medical school. Of course, women have been healers and midwives for all time, but it was earning that degree, that accredited degree that would validate them into the medical profession, that was really going to make a difference for women to be more accepted alongside of men in operating rooms and laboratories and all. So the Female Medical College, founded in 1850, which I had discovered that my great-great-grandfather was involved with, it was renamed to the Women's Medical in 1867. So as I mentioned earlier, I went to Wheaton College in Massachusetts, at the time a women's college before it went co-ed. And so I immediately became interested that there were women's medical colleges. And who were those women that wanted to go to medical school in the 1800s? What drove them? What inspired them? And what challenges and triumphs did they have? So, as we like to say in historical fiction writing, it was down the rabbit hole I went. And I had gone through quite a few different paths in that rabbit hole just with my genealogy research. But now I was going to look further into the characters of history, those real people that were going to inspire me to write The Unlocked Path. Again, I've read a lot of historical fiction. I had never heard of these colleges or these women. And I thought to myself, with my empty nest, extra hours now, I'm going to write a novel. Because if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? So I went further into that rabbit hole and learned more about the college itself. Of course, opened in 1850, originally on Arch Street in Philadelphia. It then moved 25 years later and expanded to this beautiful building in the middle, located on North College Avenue. They had state-of-the-art laboratories in there. They expanded again by 1930 and included a hospital facility, a maternity hospital, so that, of course, they were then not only training doctors, but they were providing instant employment for their graduates, because it was still very difficult, even with that degree in their hands, for them to find positions at other hospitals. The school did finally admit a few men around 1970 for co-education, and then fully merged with Drexel University by about 2014. But it was the longest running women-only medical schools. Another one had opened shortly thereafter up in Boston, and another one in New York, but it was the Women's Medical in Philadelphia that was the longest running for nearly 125 years. Now, the next return that you'll often find when you start to look into the Women's Medical College is this amazing photo of 3 students taken in 1885 when they attended one of the dean's receptions at the college. 3 women that came from around the globe to study medicine in Philadelphia. The woman on the left, or maybe you're right, this woman here is from India. Another one was from Japan, and another one from Turkey. But they did come from all over the world and all over the country to study in Philadelphia. But it was the woman from India, Anadebai Gopal Joshi, that story, when I started to read about her, that I felt like she personified that type of woman that was driven and determined to want to study medicine. And her story is nothing less than amazing. She came from an upper caste in India in mid 1800s, and very common practice back then to have arranged marriages. She was actually married at the age of 9 to a man 20 years older than her. By the time she was 14, she had her first child. And unfortunately, he died 10 days later from tuberculosis, another terrible disease that was very, very common in the 1800s and early 1900s. But it was losing that child and the grief that overtook her, and the frustration and the anger that there was a lack of care for herself and for other mothers and for other women around her, that they couldn't find or feel trusted male physicians. So she decided she wanted to study medicine. And she was very, very fortunate that her husband was supportive of that decision as well, and helped her to seek out where she could study medicine. And they found the Women's Medical College in Philadelphia. And so she wrote her application letter to the board. And this is the prologue in The Unlocked Path, again, because the words are just so eloquent. And I was so moved by this 17-year-old woman from India to write these types of words that I felt that I had to use them as a starting point for my novel. So I'll let Selena read this in case the print is a little tough with the script.
The determination which has brought me to your country against the combined opposition of my friends and caste ought to go a long way towards helping me to carry out the purpose for which I came, i.e., is to render to my poor suffering countrywomen the true medical aid they so sadly stand in need of, and which they would rather die than accept at the hands of a male physician. The voice of humanity is with me, and I must not fail. My soul is moved to help the many who cannot help themselves.
Just incredible words. So after meeting Anna Dubai, then I started to seek out the stories of some of the other students and graduates. And that's where I was starting to meet those women who were so determined to go to a women's medical college, that they were taking an entrance exam that was purported to be even harder, more difficult as an exam, and the material covered on the exam than what the other male schools were offering. They had to prove and demonstrate their intellect. They were women who wanted to show that they deserved a spot in the operating rooms as much as any other man, and that they were capable of performing surgeries, and that they wouldn't pass out when they saw a little bit of blood and gore, and that they were fully capable of performing those surgeries as much as any man. Women who wanted to serve their country with their abilities as doctors, who volunteered to go to France in 1918, 1917, with the US Army to serve during World War I, who offered their services and were denied by the US Army to take on those services because they were women. They formed their own American Women's Hospital, and they went to France on their own, and they were treating the French civilians that were injured with the war going on around them. Women that I discovered, like Charlotte Fairbanks from Vermont, who went to women's medical and graduated first with degrees from Smith and Yale and Bryn Mawr, a very accomplished woman, and then came to women's medical for her medical degree and became a surgeon and became one of the chief surgeons that went to France and was honored by the French government with a medal for her dedication to serving the French civilians. Women who wanted to study in laboratories, who were not fazed at all by spending hours and hours in labs with all of the smells and odors and the bleary eyes of studying slides and chemicals, of how they could give their part to medicine with discoveries that would help everyone. Women like Olga Pavinsky, another woman that I loved her story. She came from Lithuania, 18 years old, embarked from Lithuania to Philadelphia to study medicine. She couldn't speak a word of English, and yet she persevered. She also served with the American Women's Hospital in France, came back and joined the New York Department of Public Health in the study of infectious diseases, diphtheria and tuberculosis. And I am not a science expert, but apparently it was one of her designs of a special culture bottle that was instrumental in Jonas Salk's polio vaccine development. So meeting Anna Dubai and Charlotte and Olga, these doctors, these women who wanted to study medicine, again, I was just so moved that their stories need to be told. And I was going to tell them in a fictional account, but to bring forward some of that authenticity to the history. So I'm going to turn again to Selena to read from chapter 17, which is graduation day for my main character, Eliza. And Eliza is a fictional character, but she's what we call a composite character. She's made up and inspired by all of the readings I had done of letters and diaries and biographies and autobiographies of other women. So I hope it will give you a hint of what it meant to her to be graduating from the Women's Medical College.
Dean Marshall opened the luncheon with a moment of reflection for Anandi. Eliza closed her eyes and lowered her head in prayer to honor the woman who inspired her. Dearest Anandi, you spoke with me when I started this journey. Today I ask for your help again. Please step with me into this calling, and I promise to remember your determination and dedication every day of my practice. Next, Reverend Abrams from St. Clement's took the podium for a droning benediction. Eliza didn't need to listen to him expound with platitudes of their God-given abilities and success. She may have prayed to God in the wee hours of a night before an exam, Heavenly Father, give me the strength to defeat the study of organic compounds. Or in the amphitheater observing their first surgical dissection of a cadaver, please, God, don't let me faint. Or at the delivery of her first maternity case for the well-being of the mother and child, bless this child, dear Lord. As much as God may have helped her, Eliza knew it was sheer will, persistence, and self-sacrifice which guided the class of 1901 to this moment. Today, they would raise their glasses to each other and to the professors and administrators who stood by them as they earned their degrees. Eliza and her classmates would enter a medical society unnoticed with footfalls as soft as the 50 classes before them. From receiving a diploma to delivering a baby to performing a life-saving surgery, their endeavors would always be marked as quiet triumphs. Not as lady physicians, not as a doctress, doctors. For a teacher is a teacher, a bookkeeper is a bookkeeper, a clerk is a clerk, a doctor is a doctor. And may our Father and Lord continue to guide in your calling to heal. Amen. Opening her eyes, Eliza looked out to her classmates seated around the other tables. Today they celebrated their futures. They would not be bound by constraints of tradition, but directed forward with joy in their hearts and the bonds of sisterhood. Forevermore, they would champion each other with a sense of connectedness and commitment. The success of one was the success of all.
Great. Thanks so much, Selena. It's nice to take a little break myself and hear somebody else read my words. So, I've met these women and, I'm now turning to find other places to do some research. And I am forever grateful to the Drexel University archives and Matt Herberson there. I went on another trip to Philadelphia and spent an entire day in their basement office. Matt had pulled out a full cart of materials for me to explore things like grade reports and newspaper clippings and letters to the dean, other application letters, letters asking for advice of how am I going to make my tuition payment. So those were incredible pieces of history about the Women's Medical College that I was so fortunate to have access to, because libraries are filled with wonderful artifacts like this. Local libraries, university libraries, historical societies, a wealth of information. Even artifacts like a bone box. And I always like to bring this in because I just thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. An actual box that the students had to rent for their term to use during their anatomy classes. Each box usually had a skull and then about 12 to 15 other bones, so that between the 40 students, they were able to assemble 2 full skeletons. They received their $5 deposit back at the end of the term, less 20%, if they returned all the bones intact and all inventoried. So that was really cool to see all these different pieces from the history of the Women's Medical College. But it was towards the end of the day that Matt came out with one more item. And I just stop for a moment and remind myself and remind everyone that my journey began when I was doing my genealogy research and discovered my great-great-grandfather had been involved with the founding of the school. But I really didn't know the extent of his involvement. Obviously he was a very well-to-do gentleman, and for all I knew, he could have just been a benefactor and contributed financially. And it wasn't until I looked at the books that Matt provided to me that were the meeting minutes from the first few years of the school, starting in 1850. And they were all transcribed by the secretary and signed, William S. Pierce. So with white gloved hands, I was holding in my hands books and turning pages that had been transcribed by my great-great-grandfather over 150 years ago in his hand. And that certainly was just a moment of pure joy for me, for that piece of family history and that actually could have been lost forever if not for his son, George, who found them in his father's law office when he was cleaning them out. So just a reminder, don't overlook what might be hidden in your closets, in your home attics and basements. You never know what you might find. And certainly Women's Medical was very fortunate that George Pierce found these books and donated them back to the college, and that they still exist today. Of course, I also used many nonfiction and reference books, autobiographies and biographies during my research. So fortunate to have come across a reference book, A New and Untried Course by Dr. Stephen Peitzman, that was just invaluable to me. You can see all the notations, all my little flags and sticky notes, and all the great information I was learning about that piece of information about the college. So certainly, nonfiction, and where I would find all those books were libraries and online bookstores and independent bookstores that were able to order them for me. So that certainly helped me in crafting my novel. And then to get a more personal level, looking at other items that I could learn from, certainly newspapers. And of course, many of our libraries still have some of the old paper editions of newspapers on hand, or they've been translated into microfiche or digitized at this point. But what would somebody living in Philadelphia, what would they see as headlines on the day that the news made it to them that the Titanic had sunk? What would people living in Boston be reading during World War I, and what was happening in France on any day? And the list of the killed in action and the wounded and the missing was always listed in the newspaper. Oh, and maybe this small little notated article down the bottom of the front page is talking about soldiers coming back from France, and they're up at Camp Devens west of Boston with some type of influenza virus in 1918, but nothing to be worried about. So that was great, rich information for me as well. Of course, magazines from the time, and an 18-year-old young woman is probably reading Harper's Bazaar and seeing the front cover of the June 1897 issue and thinking to herself, geez, that dress on that model looks like a tiered wedding cake to me. Or turning the page and seeing that the cure-all for women is Miss Lydia Pinkman's magical remedies. So I had to even have a little fun as well and bring some levity to the novel also. So just seeing this advertisement also inspired a scene. And at this point, my main character, Eliza, is a doctor, and she is visiting with one of her patients. So I'll let Selena read that passage from chapter 29.
And this is my last passage from The Unlocked Path. I'm pleased she's nursing so well and Louisa is managing. But how are you feeling to help them through their mother-gone time? Nina turned her back on Eliza and shifted Dorothy to her other shoulder without an answer. Hell's bells. Had the Rexall druggist refused to fill Nina's prescription? Eliza had heard from other patients that the pharmacist on Erie Avenue balled up and tossed prescriptions she wrote into a trash basket. He denied her validity as a doctor to sign one. I don't need those pills, Nina grunted. Mrs. Lydia Pinkham's remedy works wonders for me. I sleep as sound as this here babe. I'm sure it does, Eliza snorted to herself. Lydia Pinkham's vegetable compound included 20% alcohol content, not any magical curative powers. Unless one considers the power of suggestion. Eliza recalled the advertisement in Ladies' Home Journal, which proclaimed it restored the health of over 500,000 women who suffered from the worst forms of female complaints and touted it eased change of life symptoms, and that wise women insist on Mrs. Pinkham's.
Great. I had to have a little chuckles with that, of course. Okay, so we're going to move on. And, I've shown you all the great resources that I've used in writing my book, in researching and trying to bring characters to life. And a lot of that was part of my genealogy research. So I was thrilled that all of those different sources were available to me. But of course, today we now do have Ancestry.com, and we do have DNA testing for families. And not sure if anybody has ever done the Ancestry DNA or the 21andMe DNA test. I have not. However, my brother has, and one of my second cousins. And when you have the DNA test done, it shows not only your ethnic background and makeup, but it also will return anybody else that has had the test that has shared DNA with you. So a couple of years ago, I received an email from my second cousin, Fred, who was posing the question to my brother and me, does anyone know this person on the family list that he didn't know who it was? And it was a Carolyn Griswold. And my brother and I immediately knew who that was. We had a first cousin on our Robinson side, a Carolyn Robinson, that had been my father's brother's daughter. Our fathers were estranged as adults, so we never knew her. But she's 20 years older than me, and I wanted to meet her because she would have known our grandmother. She would have been 14 when our grandmother passed. And I wrote to her, found her name and address, and she actually lived right in Rhode Island, and wrote to her and explained that I was writing a story very loosely based on our Pierce family in Philadelphia. And would she by any chance have any stories or information she could share with me as part of my genealogy research about our grandmother, or maybe she knew more about the Pierce family. So I wrote to her, and she very graciously immediately contacted me and said, yes, please come for a visit. And so my brother Mark and I did. We drove to Rhode Island and met Carolyn. We didn't know, her name had changed, of course, from Carolyn Robinson to Carolyn Griswold, which is why we can never find her before. But she pulled out of her attic. Again, those attics are pretty important. You don't know what's in the back corners in boxes tucked away for years and years. But she had photographs of our grandmother that we had never seen before. So we were thrilled to see this one. I also have it over my shoulder. We think this is our grandmother at about 18. It looks like it might have been her debutante portrait in a white dress and all. She was a little bit of a Gibson girl look to her. And the other item that just last week, I met up with Carolyn again, that I had a book club meeting for the Unlocked Path in her town in Rhode Island. And she joined me for the book club and brought another box. And inside that box were some volumes of cyclopedias, not encyclopedias. They were just entries, biographies, short biographies of prominent people in America. And it was published in 1888, and the entire set had belonged to our grandfather, Robinson. His nameplate was inside each volume. Well, history nerd that I am, I immediately started to flip through those pages and flip to the P's to see, I wonder if there's anything on William Shannon Pierce. And there it was in print, the information that I had found online, the same entry and the same notation that he did take an active part in founding the Women's Medical College in Philadelphia. So again, it was, just pure happenstance that she had done the DNA test and her name was listed, and that she lived so close. And now we have developed a lovely relationship and friendship, and are thrilled that we can connect and discuss family history. And that is just so important, to talk to other family members and see what they know and see what they can share. Firsthand, the oral traditions that seem to have been lost in our digital age, to have those conversations just can provide so much rich information. And it doesn't mean you have to write a book about it, but it can just enrich your own life, and it can leave a legacy for your children as well. So again, because I never knew my grandmother's story, once I got to know her and the timeline of her life, that is what I set the book against. 1897, when my main character is coming of age at the age of 18 in Philadelphia, marrying at the age of 31 in 1912, having 2 children by the time she's 33. And then these are all incredible photos we had never seen before because they were in Carolyn's attic, tucked away into a box. And she had also just some other items that we had never seen before. And now I can pass on to my sons and my nephews photos of their grandfather, whom they never knew. My dad passed before any of his 4 grandsons were born. So now I can share these photos with them and hopefully keep that legacy alive of our family history going back to the Judge Pierce. And of course, I've been so enamored with that name that my oldest son was named James Pierce, and he goes by Pierce. So again, I never knew my grandmother's full story. So taking liberties in writing fiction, I decided to create one, and really thrilled with, you know, how the book is doing, how it's connecting with readers, making them appreciate the research that went into the writing, and making, again, those shadows of history to try to brush them aside and bring light, particularly to those women graduates of the medical school in Pennsylvania. So thank you so much, Selena, for having me. And I'm hoping, I don't have a clock in front of me. I've been trying to not to look at my phone for a change, to see, hopefully we do have some time for any questions that may have come in through the chat.
Thank you so much, Janice. That was great. Such incredible work and research and thought that went into this, in addition to your own personal family history that you weaved into the Unlocked Path. Quick question for you. Are there any discoveries in your genealogical research that might inspire another novel?
Well, there definitely could be. So I do have a sequel already planned for the Unlocked Path that will take some of my characters from 1920 forward up through World War II, possibly into early 1950s. So have some ideas sketched out for the sequel. But I do have another interesting family ancestor that I discovered that I haven't proved out completely, but I'm going with it and I'm going to claim it. So for now, anyway. So when I was researching and had discovered those 7 daughters of the judge, and that they were women of intellectual ability and character, and he had founded the women's medical school, immediately I'm thinking, I wonder if any of them went to the medical school and were inspired to become doctors themselves. So I started to research each one of those daughters' names. And there was only one that really came up in any significant way. And the name Florence Pierce, the youngest daughter, spelled the same way, and the P-E-I-R-C-E is not the usual spelling for Pierce. But Florence Pierce's name shows up in a letter on file at the Library of Congress. And it's a letter written by a settlement house worker in Boston who has written to Fred Holland Day, who was a Boston art benefactor and photographer himself. And the social worker, settlement worker, Jesse Beale Fremont, is passing along information from an art teacher of Florence Pierce at the settlement house, that she has a student that she feels is capable and has artistic abilities that needs help in developing. And this immigrant child from Lebanon needs an artistic education. And would Mr. Day, at the suggestion of this Florence Pierce, find a way to help this young boy, Kahil. And Kahil is Kahil Gibran, a famous artist, and of course, then turned also to poetry and wrote The Prophet. So again, I haven't done all of my research to point out and claim that this Florence Pierce was my grandmother's great aunt, or her aunt. But it sounds like a fascinating story to me. the work of those settlement houses in Boston and Philadelphia and Chicago and other major cities, and the students they have and who they might have turned into. So that could possibly be framing up another novel. So really it was, again, that single sentence found in an obituary while doing genealogy research that inspired me to write The Unlocked Path. And again, I'm thrilled and happy to have shared the story with you all this evening, and hope we do have some time. You can always find more information about myself as well as the Philadelphia, the Historical Society of Pennsylvania on our websites, but hoping we do have some time for some Q&A.
So if anyone has any additional questions, please drop them in the chat. In the meantime, Janice, do you have any advice on publishing a book? Can you talk about the process of finding a publisher and any advice you might give to someone who is looking to publish their own book?
Well, I'd probably say you need to be as tough and determined as those women that wanted to go to medical school, because publishing, I won't say it's on the same plane, certainly, as the study of medicine, but it's tough, it's demanding, and it's very competitive, of course, with self-publishing out there today now as well. The traditional publishing houses, thank goodness, we don't have two that were blocked from merging to make it even harder, but it's a tough road. So it's writing the book can really be only half the battle. It's finding an agent, it's finding a publisher that believes in your story as much as you do. And of course, any reading is subjective. So finding that right fit of somebody who believes in your book as much as you do and will champion it forward to publication is key. And it takes a long time. It took me almost a year to find Black Rose Writing, who is an independent press, that I was able to submit information on the book, and they requested to read the full manuscript, and then they asked to publish it. So I was thrilled when I got that email finally, after months and months of crickets from a lot of other agents and publishers, or just the polite form response of no thank you. So very, very excited in working with Black Rose, and definitely Reagan Roth, the publisher, has been very supportive.
Great. We do have a question in the Q&A. Is your Pierce family also related to the founder of Pierce College in Philadelphia? Same spelling.
It is the same spelling, and I've been looking into that. So it wasn't the Judge Pierce. I believe there is a middle school, a public middle school in Philadelphia that is named for William Shannon Pierce, but I haven't connected the dots of how Pierce College might be related. I'm guessing there is. I think one of the original owners of Longwood Gardens out in, I think, Kennett Square, I think, was a Pierce, and I think that family sold it to the DuPonts. Was it the DuPonts?
Yes, the DuPonts.
So definitely Pierce seemed to be a very prominent name in Philadelphia history. William Pierce, my ancestor, actually came from Delaware, and was born in Delaware and moved to Philadelphia, maybe because there was other family there. So I'm still trying to connect those dots as well. But maybe I'll task one of my brothers or my sons or my nephews to start looking into that.
Great. We have another question, this time from the chat, asking if William was a relative of C. Newland Pierce, spelled the same way, who was a faithful board member of the Women's Medical College for many years. He was a Quaker who later embraced ethical culture.
Yes, so I also came across that name, but I haven't seen, it might have been a cousin. Again, I haven't been able to connect those dots, but I had seen those names coming up fairly often as well. So it may have been a cousin for sure, but I haven't seen many mentions of siblings of William Pierce to know whether he had a brother or brothers. So still need to prove that out as well.
Very interesting. And just in from Justina, the winning attendee of their very own copy of The Unlocked Path is Marjorie Jones. So we will be reaching out to Marjorie personally to send you your copy.
Oh, that's fabulous. Well, Marjorie, I will sign the book for you when Selena reaches out to you just to get your mailing address so I can mail it out to you. Selena, why don't we just make a note to ask Marjorie if she would like me to just to sign it or if she would like me to also inscribe it. I always give folks that option. And I'm heading out of town for Thanksgiving for my first time. Not having a New England Thanksgiving. My son has moved to Texas, of all places, but we're looking forward to barbecue and Tex-Mex instead of traditional turkey and stuffing and gravy. So I'll get the book out to you as soon as I get back.
Well, you will be enjoying a warm Thanksgiving while us in Philadelphia will suffer through the cold. But that is just about out of time for us. I'm going to put a few links in the chat. The first is for our newsletter, hsp.org/enews. The second is a listing of our upcoming events. And the third is the link to purchase The Unlocked Path. If you would like to purchase a copy of The Unlocked Path, you can go to Amazon, but you can also ask your local independent bookstore or your local library to stock the Unlocked Path in their store, in their library. Thank you everybody for joining us tonight. It was an absolutely amazing program, Janis. I loved hearing about your family. We will be sending a follow-up email with these links and the recording, and we hope everybody has a wonderful Thanksgiving and a very happy holiday season.
Great. Thank you so much. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.